Welcome to Council's Judgment, episode 7.5. Episode 8, technically, but we don't actually know if episode 7 will see the light of day. Today, as usual, I'm joined by the counselors on the panel. We have Sasha Christensen. How are you doing today, Sasha?
I'm here. I'm 2 glasses deep. I'm good to go.
Yeehaw. And we have local man converts to birdism, Spencer Kanaka.
Yeah.
I will say I am still very salty about our match where you took a 14-minute turn on Monday, so you're lucky I'm even here with you tonight.
Nadu is a fair and balanced non-deterministic combo card.
So instead, in lieu of a full set review 2 weeks after all cards have been spoiled, obviously we appreciate all the listeners that have stuck with us through our hiatus. We obviously missed kind of the pre-release slash spoiler season for Modern Horizons 3, and have gotten some feedback that people may want stuff other than set reviews from us, which is what we set out for anyway. So we're going to do kind of a first impressions podcast today. I think most of us, I know Sasha's still kind of been down for the count a little bit, but we played a couple tournaments with Modern Horizons Card 3 being legal, and I've been jamming a ton on Magic Online with various decks and against various decks. We're just going to do a first impressions and what our thoughts on kind of the big hitters of the set are in the format and what we see them being going forward. So these are kind of categorized by color. A lot of them are going to kind of slot into similar decks, obviously. First, we're just going to talk about Guide of Souls, which didn't honestly catch my eye in spoiler season, as I'm not a Martyr sicko like Spencer or shout out Pleacho. This card is really good and is not just a Martyr of Sands card. I think it's Tax's card and probably like a Boros aggro humans card as well. Spencer, as someone who's kind of apt to play those decks, do you think it's versatile enough to pretty much be like a white X aggro staple?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of the new white aggro. It's also the magic human for Kindred Tribal. I think that the fact that it just has offensive ability, so it's not just a defensive Soul Sister being a 1/2, but just I think everyone kind of slept until they saw it play out in Modern a lot on the energy, the 2 counters, the flying, and just the continual ability of it to basically make your creatures large and get in and actually like end the game. And I think that's something that a lot of like white X archetypes are looking for, is a way to like end the game quickly since they don't have as much haste.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Sasha, I think probably is someone who's more apt to sit across from this card or even this group of cards than to play with them. What would your impression be? It's kind of similar, or
Yeah, the thing that I mean, this may sound really silly to say like a 1/2 is a lot better than a 1/1, but it legitimately
yeah,
is.
no, it's
Uh,
a huge deal.
Like the fact that Bowmasters doesn't kill it, Ren and Six Ping doesn't kill it. Like these aren't just like oopsie cards that sometimes pop up. Like these are staples of our format. And having a 1/2 actually matters a whole bunch. And like Soul Sisters, like there's a reason why you don't play these in mid-range decks. Like they just are really medium, especially later on in the game. And Guide of Souls has the secondary clause that like it doesn't just it is a house later on, being able to throw 2 power a flying counter onto one of your guys and swing in with the like honestly pretty low cost of just 3 other creatures entered play, which yeah, your Guide of Souls stack is probably going to be able to do. Like this is a card that doesn't just like you can't ignore it in the same way you can other Soul Sister effects.
Yeah, or even like other 1 drops too. It's kind of annoying for red. It's annoying for like mid-range decks because it gives guys flying and puts a large amount of pressure on a combo player pretty quickly. So I think it's early. It's obviously still need to see things play out, but like I think I see this being like one of the best 1 drops for those types of decks going forward. I think it's just an absolute slam dunk all star for white X aggro, and like, I don't know, like just anything that's playing a bunch of creatures in white for sure. So moving on here, just talking kind of same vein, And we can kind of talk about White Orchid Phantom and Ocelot Pride, maybe in similar kind of facets here, coming off our episode talking primarily about small white creatures. Obviously, these are potentially white taxes cards, specifically White Orchid Phantom. And Ocelot Pride, I guess, more slotting towards maybe like Winota decks or those Soul Sisters kind of aforementioned decks. What are, I guess, touching on the Knight first, Spencer, is this just kind of a taxes only card, but a solid one at that?
Yeah, I think White Orchid Phantoms goes into like all the D&T decks. Just has the right stats. It's like very pushed, reliable. Ocelot Pride, I think, has a bit of play beyond just like kind of like Martyr Life Gain decks. I actually think me and Stash were discussing this earlier. It's actually kind of like a sleeper card. I think that it's better also than people give it credit for. Its ability to just like kind of like dominate the board. It's just another one drop in white that I think's quite powerful and is also like not bad late game. Like I think it's good in the mid game. It's great turn one. I think a lot of the white decks are looking to pick this up. I don't think it necessarily goes in every white X deck, but I think that it's another card that's like easy to 2-4, easy to build around, easy to recur, etc.
I think Ocelot Pride is legitimately a lot closer to Ragavan than people are giving it credit for. There are very few one-drops in like the whole of Highlander, really the whole of Magic, that actually can run away with a game on their own. Ragavan's obviously a good example of that, just not in terms of the damage it presents, but the fact that it accrues card advantage. Ocelot Pride, I mean, these 1/1s, that is value over time, and it can actually attack into a lot of things a lot better than Ragavan. Like the play pattern that you often encounter of like, I played a Ragavan, your opponent played a Mana Dork, and then suddenly your Ragavan can't attack into it, Ocelot Pride gets to ignore. And while it doesn't have the dash and doesn't do as much damage, it has the buyout clause that later in the game, when you have this other incidental life gain, it has an effect still, and that ascend trigger is a lot more likely to happen. So I think this card is like, it's one that I'd be excited to play in any deck with removal or incidental life gain. I think this card is really good.
Nice. One of the things, just as we continue on, like White really gained a lot here. Like this was a great set for D&T pilot. I know, like weirdly enough, like most of our D&T pilots locally are not really playing anymore or not consistently. So we've definitely seen a downtick locally in D&T in our metagame, whether that's a result of our metagame kind of being a mid-range slugfest where it's kind of preys on D&T a bit, and also, as I said, the pilots haven't really been coming out as much. But I think could see an uptick with all these cards. I think our last two here, we've got Good Doggophilia. I continue to be impressed by this card. Played against it quite a bit, actually, like in white X aggro, and then kind of even like a more like scam kind of Highlander shell. Obviously, you can't run like consistent scam, but it was just like playing blink, playing scam effects, and trying to kind of disrupt your plan. And when you get to do that every turn and it makes the creature bigger, it's a pretty big game ender. I think this card's pretty cool, and I really like it in the shells that it will obviously be good in. Came up where even like incidental effects where you're getting like small bonuses off like Charming Prince or ETB effects in your like Winota style deck, you get a lot of value from it fairly quickly. Sasha, what do you think about our good boy here?
So in our Outlaws of Thunder Junction set review, I remember advocating for a 3-mana 2/4 that did something similar to Felia. If you like saddled it and I don't know, like paid $10 and had to like high five your opponent to make it work. This card is so good. I think like it obviously Ajani is a no-brainer. Like this card is bananas. It's a new staple for our format. It goes in so many different decks, not just the ones that can sacrifice it. It's just good enough on its own. I think Feli is very, very close to that. Like even the application of just it's a 2/2 that grows, not necessarily when it attacks, but afterwards, like that is close to being good enough on its own. And then like the fact that it can blink your opponent's things, it can remove Karnstrucks, like that is a really good utility. And then it can like blink your initiative threats. Like this card is so good. I'm so pumped to play with it.
Just wait till Spencer starts blinking Soul Sisters cards with it. He's more stoked than anyone.
You know my Moxfield Martyr deck has risen to the top, and Thomas should be very scared because he made me that bet, and we didn't play out our matches before this update. So the Martyr deck's actually looking better by the day. There's no way Seeker can beat it now.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time talking about a Johnny just because that's Sasha said it's a staple. It's gonna probably go in every white deck that's interested in attacking.
Like some
yeah.
people, I think in like the multicolored Seeker decks and stuff like that are like kind of humming and hawing, but they obviously just haven't seen it, like the play patterns with it yet, because the card's nuts. It'd be like if you slept on like Orcish Bowmaster or something like that and thought it was just medium in like Highlander, then I don't know. Ajani's pretty cracked. Like it's if you're playing a white X creature deck, like you're just playing this card.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and like even like up to 3, even like I think a lot of the 3-4 color versions should be playing it too.
100% agree.
All right, so blue, like I'll preface this by saying like I've been playing a ton of modern since the set came out, and have mostly been playing like the Blue Wizards style decks. So I'm like, oh, I've been playing these cards, and then I was like, oh, actually, haven't played a ton of them or against them in Highlander, but Harbinger of Seas, very self-explanatory. I again don't think we need to spend too much time on it. It's going to go in Blue Moon style red blue decks. I know Chris Sutherland was playing it, I believe, in his winning list for blue white control list this week. That was very heavy on basic lands and playing back to basics. Yeah, so that kind of, I don't know. If you guys have anything to add, go for it. But pretty self-explanatory card, and where we're going to see it, then it does add another effect. But I will say, turning lands into islands is quite a bit worse than turning them into mountains in our format, in my opinion.
It's much stronger against the decks that Magus of the Moon historically has been very bad against. Like the real problem with Magus was that like every single very good 4-color mid-range deck in the format, and honestly to a lesser extent 3-color, they're always ones that are base blue-red, like Check, Jeskai Green, regular Jeskai Black. Like those are the most successful archetypes in terms of the mid-range, like the blue mid-range space. And the thing that they're really supported by is the density of red removal. Now, Harbinger gets to say no to all of that. Those are also all decks that honestly would prefer to play as few basics as possible. And I know whenever I've built the decks, I've often leaned more towards having one island being the only non-basic, or maybe the one plains to enable a way to get out from under Blood Moon. So I think it is like very powerful as a hammer, but as you alluded to, Willie, for the Blue Moon decks in particular, those are decks that are often, they are actively looking to turn their non-basics into mountains under a Blood Moon. And honestly, Basic Mountain is one of the worst typed lands in the whole deck. So I think that this is obviously a very strong incentive to add more of those basic mountains. But I do recognize what you're saying, and I will absolutely lose to this card, but hey, fair's fair.
Yeah, more so for me, I guess I'm just thinking that control decks can dig, or control and mid-range decks playing blue are generally playing like the cantrip suites, so they're just going to get to look at more cards. But I guess it is definitely harder to remove when you make them islands. Anything to add, Spencer? Or
I mean, I think having more non-basic land hate in the format's actually good.
Yeah.
But honestly, I still think that the biggest non-basic land hate was them printing surveil lands and then people being off trams.
Yeah, no, totally.
Agree.
Brain Surge, I will just really quickly add, I think people should be playing more of this card. I've been super impressed by it. Hashtag humblebrag won last Monday with a Grixis Thoracle Reanimator hybrid deck, and Brain Surge was fantastic. I think it's really good, and you should be playing it if you're playing probably any blue control deck that's under 4 colors, and also any deck that's interested in not having certain cards in their hand. So Reanimator, Flash, Oracle sometimes. I know 3-mana draw has historically kind of been not great, but 4 cards is a lot of cards to look at for 3-mana. And then the Prodigal Daughter, I think, of blue for the set. Tameo is incredible. I don't know that it necessarily enables new decks or anything, but in the blue-red kind of Murktide shells, where they were very close to just being able to play all good cards in 2 colors, which is great. I much prefer having the option to do that. It's very close to actually, like Sasha and I were talking about blue-red specifically, and it's like, oh, you just get to play like 67 great cards now, like 65, 66, 67, depending on your curve, and Tameo is a big addition to that. Just pretty interesting play patterns. It can block 1-drops if you need it to, and then you can just kind of like flip it with the Brainstorm. Yeah, really impressed. Great card. A+. Sasha, what do you think? What kind of decks do you see this kind of making its way into?
Any deck that includes blue.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that facetiously. Like this.
Yeah.
This card is just going to be a staple, I think, until the end of time. Like, as long as there's the play pattern that you get into where, like, you want to play draw go, this card is one that you want to have in your deck, just because it allows you to unlock that mana if you don't end up using it on a counterspell. And, like, this card's just sweet. I like the idea of playing it in Artifact Shell too, but that's so incidental. Like, this is just a slam dunk for any blue deck. Like, I was talking to somebody recently who was comparing it to JVP, Jason Vryn's Prodigy, and I think its play patterns are kind of similar, but I think its ceiling is much higher, and the cost of playing a 1-mana 0/3 flyer is a lot lower than playing a 2-mana 0/2. Like,
Yeah.
this card is just so annoying to deal
Yeah,
with.
I think it's like marketably better than JVP, which is saying something because that card is decent and still very playable in certain decks. But I think Tameo is the real deal for sure. What do you think, Spencer? Are we overhyping or about writing?
In every game I played where like the opponent had it, it seemed good. The games that I played it was definitely serviceable. And I wasn't even playing it in like a recall deck. So I thought it was a good card.
All right, so black got some interesting cards. Black I've been very interested in having black get more playables, just because it's been very hard to make 2-color black decks for quite a long time. And we definitely got a few bangers here. Firstly, the Goyf package of Barogoyf and Nethergoyf. I would probably guess if you're playing one, you're playing the other most of the time. Maybe not all the time, because 1 mana is obviously a lot less than 3. But Barogoyf is a big boy and does a lot of things, like card advantage, gains life against aggro. Like, I've been very impressed by it in a couple different decks, and I know all the resident Jund players are very excited about it. Do you think there's a distinction between the two, Spencer, in terms of one seeing more play potentially or in different decks than the other, or are these kind of a package deal, do you see?
I mean, like I definitely don't think I think Beargrave's okay. I think there's if people are trying to play like mid-range slugfests, then I think it's like good. You know, if you think the life gain is gonna be relevant and you want a big beater in those matchups for a 3-drop. But I just think the format's just fundamentally picking up speed. So I'm more interested in cards like Nethergoyf for sure. If you want to be playing like some sort of beater, also the fact that you can escape it. I think cards like Nethergoyf are gonna definitely go up in stock in our format as time goes on. And I think cards like Barogoyf and like Pyrogoyf are just gonna become like interesting, fun things you play with your friends. That's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think it's funny because sorry, Sasha, to cut you off. Like, I know there's a big discrepancy, and like, I think Victoria is kind of painted as this like hugs and rainbows metagame. And I think it's just been it's not slow to adapt, but just trying to out mid-range each other. And instead of trying to go play combo, which was the actual answer, it's like, no, like I'm going to go over the top and play even more like ridiculous things to be better, or cast Saw in half on my seasoned Dungeoneer. Shout out Robin.
Well, yeah, just and like obviously there's a lot of people that are tournament organizers or like Pro Tour people and whatever that are just like trying to have fun games. But like whenever there's an actual like high-end event or like something for like staples or a classic or anything like that, like everyone just plays combo, like or a blue deck to fight combo or D&D essentially, or like maybe some meta deck, but typically like
Red, green,
the format warps to all the tier 1 decks. It's not just people trying to flex their like brewer prowess on people.
I top forward with prowess. Thank you very much at the last big event. So, which we'll never ever get to hear about because the podcast has been deleted.
Just to add on a couple notes to these cards.
Yeah, please.
I genuinely think that, and we'll talk a bit more about some other includes later on once we get multicolored, but I do think specifically Barrogoyf and Nethergoyf, and to a lesser extent Emperor Bones, does substantially shift the kind of obvious the metro or the template that you go into building like a 4 to 3 color mid-range deck with, in a way that shifts it a lot more towards black. Like these are real incentives to be in that color that haven't historically existed, and I think that they are strong enough that I personally think that Czech is probably better than Jeskai Green in this post MH3 world. I'm very willing to be proven wrong. Obviously, it's like, oh, you're playing all the good cards in 4 colors that are slightly different. But it's also just an archetype that has been less played in our format, as people have really defaulted to Jeskai Green as like the default, not just best deck, but definitely best mid-range deck.
One quick note on Emperor Bones too is that because I didn't mention it, I think that card's quite good, and I think it's a card that I slept on, but I've had it played against me, and it's in most of my decks, but I haven't really had a chance to like see it kind of play pattern on the field too much in testing or in tournaments, and it's really impressed me. It's a solid card.
Yeah, no, I think Emperor Bones is solid as well. Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's definitely a philosophy change, and I think Spencer's right in terms of people are always going to play more combo when there's money on the line. But like turn 2 flash hulking people for an entire night is not super fun for a lot of people, at least. But I just definitely disagree. Like I think Barrogoyf is like pretty close to a format staple, but I'll wait and see if I'm proven wrong there.
It's really nice that it has this incidental, like it's good against Reanimator, and then it can also just be a good mid-range card. And honestly, the activation of just like, I'm going to exile your mana dork, and I'm going to turn my Emperor Bones into like a 4/4 for.
Oh, we just talked about 2 different cards. That's okay. I was talking about Barrogoyf again.
Okay,
Emperor Bones is solid.
Okay. No, I think I am the mid-range fighter, so I'm defaulting to loving Barrogoyf, but I actually think Spencer has a very good point in terms of as the format starts to speed up, and it seems to be less and less about these grindy mid-range fests, and the stock of Barrogoyf will decrease over time. I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we'll be there for a while.
All right, the last one is an interesting one. It's Sorin of House Markov, and this has kind of been ripping it up in Modern, which honestly, like I didn't even really think of this card too much for Highlander until it started showing up as like a 4 of in Modern lists, like mid-range decks. I was like, what is going on here? And the fact of the matter is this thing is insanely easy to flip if your deck is built in such a way to flip it, and B, like you can like one shot your opponent sometimes. Like obviously like the dream is like Martyr gain 18 or something and kill them, but outside of Magical Christmas Land there's just so many cards that make this really really solid, in also obviously just like making food, putting game objects into play very early in the game. I know like a local player who plays a lot of like black based mid range and aristocrat style decks is like very very high on this card, and thinks it's like one of the best cards in the set for Highlander. I thought I definitely slept on this and didn't really have it picked out. I didn't pre-order any. I didn't pick any up in a big order I made a couple weeks ago, and I'm definitely kicking myself now as it skyrockets. What do you think? Is this kind of like close to just like I don't think it can be called a black staple because I don't think with just extort it's getting you there, but like even just with small other amounts of life gain, Sasha, what do you think of Soren?
I think this is another good example of how the deck building in our format is just so fundamentally different because of how it gets constructed. Like building a mid-range deck in Modern that can trivially gain the 3 life is so easy. The
Yeah.
answer, you get to throw 4 Flage in there, and then you cast a like Guide of Soul with Extort, and then play to any other creature. Like that's really easy to achieve with Soren, and you just don't reach that same kind of density whenever you're building a Highlander deck. So like I'm pretty low on the card. There's definitely going to be decks that it's going to be quite good in. I just think the likelihood of you naturally playing a deck where you're going to organically encounter just gaining 3 life incidentally is going to be low enough that it will not be that good. That all being said, it is a startlingly serviceable body. So it's not like you are just like completely out and you're required to flip it for it to like be a playable card. Just having a 2-mana 1/4 lifelink extort, that is honestly not the most embarrassing thing that you can play in this format. So I'll give it that.
Fair. Spencer, as probably the person most likely to cast this following a turn 1 Martyr of Sands, what do you think?
Actually, it just slots right into my Spike Feeder deck. I was quite excited for it because I quite like it in my Absent deck where it's just a kill con.
Yeah.
And any life, like a lot of the green-white or Absen style kind of like incidental life gain decks, like even like, a lot of them are playing like Sheepbeard and stuff like that as their 4-drop. So no, it's quite good in those decks. If you're playing those kind of mid-range decks, this card's a staple. These are obviously like a lot of like sideways decks, so it's whatever. I don't think like if you're a generic black X deck plays this, but I think if you're like an Absen deck, you're a creature combo with some sort of life gain, then I think this is definitely like incredibly powerful. So like a lot of those like obscure decks.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I lean to. Like I think it's a very powerful card. You still obviously, yeah, you can't just, as you said, I mean, maybe you can just cast Flage and immediately flip it, but that isn't going to come up nearly as often as it does in Modern. But yeah, I like it. I think it's a good card, and I look forward to seeing kind of what shells. I didn't even think of it as like in that Abzan deck. That's another great place for it. All right, moving on to red. We got Pyrogoyf. Pyrogoyf is probably my least favorite of the Tarmogoyf, of the Goyfs in this set. That being said, it definitely still has a home, and probably if your deck has Mana Crypt in it and is red, probably going to play Pyrogoyf. That's kind of where I lie on the card. Like I don't see decks like Jeskai picking it up. If your deck was playing Flametongue Kavu, you're probably going to play Pyrogoyf. Probably better, or not probably, I'm quite certain it is better than Flametongue Kavu, but I don't think it's marketably better. Spencer, am I off base on this Goyf, or what do you think?
I recently said this card was pretty trash, and then I lost to it, but I lost to the Blood Moon and not the Pyrogoyf, to be honest. It's a strict upgrade to FTK, and I think if you're in the market for FTK, you should get that out and get this in. And if you're in the market for those kind of cards, like that sounds like a really sweet mid-range format, and that sounds like a lot of fun. And I hope everyone's having a really fun time playing those games.
Someone is definitely salty at losing its 4-0 to a Jund deck.
I mean, this is just a card where I'm like, I like maybe 4-color Branded style decks like it as their removal spell of choice. They can get off Jailer if they're those colors. It's a little bit easier to cast. It's a bit better if a win con kind of like sticks to Dome, so like it's a bit of an upgrade there. But I just find all these cards like incredibly slow, and maybe like Crypt Soul Mana decks like they can play this card, but is it better than like the Hellkites and like other territorial Hellkites, like the other 4 like mana haste guys that just kill you? Maybe it's comparable, maybe. I don't know. I just think that it's pretty mid. I think if everyone's playing this, the format is very slow where you're playing. And if you play this and win, you probably were already winning. But like I think a lot of time people like look at this in their hand and be like, ooh, FTK basically, and then lose the game. So
yeah, I mean, notably it does go to the Dome. I think it's quite a bit better than like Territorial Hellkite, because it does basically just have haste if you want it to, in that it just directly goes face as well. But yeah, I think it's a auto include in a red deck with Soul Mana. Like if your points is Soul Ring, Ancient Tomb, Mana Crypt, this is in your deck, 100%. But yeah, I don't think it's gonna like make its way into Jeskai or something like that. But I could
So-
be wrong.
And the
So-
problem is like red decks don't always like push their graveyards.
Yeah.
Like you know, even if you power this out with a crypt, and like let's say you're turn 2 casting this, it's like what is it? Is it a 1/2? Is it a 2/3? Like big whoop.
Yeah.
Like
No,
I don't know.
yeah,
But the
I think
game,
it's more like it's easier to double spell or something. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like it could be worse to power out than FTK.
like
Yeah.
I'd rather face this any day than like gut or bombardiers. Like those are the cards that actually kill you. Like they kill you very fast. Like this card, it's like whatever. The extra mana is like pretty relevant. And sure, like sometimes people will be like lay it down and it does 7 damage and they blink it. It's like cool. Or like they like it's a 6/7 for some weird reason late game and they get to fling it with their bombardiers. And it's like, well, they were just dead anyway, you know?
So I will give 2 quick caveats to Pyroglyph. One, it's very good if you clone it. So if you're playing a silly like creature combo pod deck with a bunch of different clone effects, the fact that it gets like not just its trigger, but a second trigger with the new Pyroglyph entering since another Pyroglyph is very powerful. It is also magical Christmas land because you've just copied your 4 mana threat that if that was any other card, you probably are killing them anyways. I do think that you guys are slightly underestimating how good it is in Jeskai, just because unlike FTK in that deck, like when you think Jeskai, you really don't think of it as an FTK deck. This Pyroglyph both blocks a lot better than FTK. It can also be deployed on an empty board in a way that FTK doesn't, since it requires it to shoot itself. So I'll give it those 2 caveats, and I actually probably would consider including this in a Jeskai deck. But yeah, the creature combo application is definitely more magical Christmas land. And I definitely agree with Spencer's point in that if you are trying to power out cards, Power isn't necessarily the first one you're going to reach for. Unlike the next card, Eldrazi Linebreaker, which you absolutely need to power out.
Yeah. Eldrazi Linebreaker, yeah, obviously incredible as a turn 1 play with Crypt. But I don't like the colorless mana thing is quite a big deal. Like I don't see this seeing play like outside of like mono red. Like it's just colorless mana. Like a lot of the decks aren't even playing Painlands anymore, so it's not easy to get. Good card, beater, but I don't really see it seeing play. And even playing mono red, like or crypt red, like you have to make considerations in your mana base to play this, and then you're probably wanting to play like Thought-Knot Seer or something, I don't know, as well potentially. But I don't know. I'm no master of mana bases, and having a mana colorless that you can't fetch for outside of 1 card is quite awkward to me. I don't know. What do you think, Sasha?
This is a medium red card. It goes nowhere else.
Yeah.
It's a very good medium red card, but it goes nowhere else.
Yeah. Spencer, any additional thoughts, or are we good to go?
I concur.
Nice. Yeah, we'll skip over Galvanic. We just note having another 1 mana 3 damage effect that's an instant in Galvanic Discharge. Excellent.
Kills Minskin Boo.
Yeah, kills Minskin Boo, and also maybe has some incidental like sweet energy play with some of the other cards that'll come up once every 25 games. But very welcome to have it. Next we've got Ral, the splashy Flipwalker. I don't know if I see a ton of applications other than in my very, very sweet red-black Storm deck. But I don't know if like actual Storm is playing this. I don't know if you guys feel otherwise or have other applications.
I think if you've made the mistake of registering Baral in your Blue Moon deck in 2024, and you cannot bring yourself to cut your Baral, then maybe you can bring yourself to cut Ral, and then eventually cut Ral or something better. Outside of that, this card I don't think belongs in our format.
And what about you, Spencer? Yeah, I don't use the applications for this.
It's just like a different type of storm deck that doesn't really exist anymore. but like obviously all the Electromancer Baral style effects used to be like kind of good in some of those versions. I don't know, Ral and Baral, I think they're fine. I'm not like super scared of them, but they do attack like a different thing. The problem is there's so much creature removal in the format that you're like losing leverage on one of your major advantages of playing like a non-creature based combo deck, and that like a lot of their cards are just dead against you. Then you're turning them live all of a sudden and you're relying on it potentially. So I don't think that's usually good like deck building.
I think like my silly deck, it was great in. I did draw it a couple times, and it was fantastic. But I don't think that deck is good. I will absolutely still bring it to a tournament this year because it's extremely fun. I think the cost reducers are doing all that much for us at this point. Moving on, Green got some really cool cards in this set, and actually in kind of hype leading up to the set, I thought Fanatic of Ronus was like the best card for Highlander in the set, which kind of proves that I am a mid-range dude at heart. I have softened on that stance. I do not believe that anymore, but I still think it's excellent. And I think it just kind of goes in a lot of different decks. I think, I think the only time I've really seen it cast in Highlander, Spencer cast it against me this week, I believe, unless I'm mistaken. Someone cast it against me this week, and it was very good. Do you think this gets in, like, I don't know, I guess like Seeker Walk or decks like that do have an abundance of mana dorks, but maybe not at 2 usually, Spencer?
Yeah, Fanatic of Ronus.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like it and Caryatid are now kind of the two premier 2-mana ones, and Wall of Roots. I think it ties for that third spot. I think if you were in the market for playing some of the other ones, like this one is just a powerful piece of cardboard. It's clearly pushed. It's hard to deal with. I think activating the 4 power in the Seeker Walk decks, splashing black is not so good. The Bant not so good. But maybe if you're playing the red versions, I think there's more of a chance of actually like leveraging its ferocious ability. Being a 1/4 strong, its ability to kind of eternalize for a pretty reasonable mana cost, I think would probably come up more often than people think, especially if you're in a removal heavy meta. I like it. I think it's really good. I think it's very powerful in like rule decks, which are already looking to like jump curve a lot of the time. And they're actually going to leverage the ferocious on this. So I think in Gruul, this card becomes a staple, and I think most other decks will experiment with it in and out that are green mid-range decks or green creature combo decks.
Yeah, I agree, and I just think, especially with the council obviously pushing natural order to just extreme measures here, I think it's really good in pretty much any deck casting natural order, and I will be definitely sleeving this one up a lot. Sasha's, do you see this scene play in like any of your like initiative decks, like the 4 or 5 color ones, or do you think it's strictly kind of like a green red, maybe Naya card?
I saw this card and I thought, wow, this is the most pushed Druid of the Cowl I've ever seen. This is not my kind of card. I think it's good. I know it's good. But I really do agree with Spencer's take on it, that it's really a staple in the monsters decks, and it will be in consideration amongst the like Sylvan Caryatid, Biophagus realm of cards that other decks tend to toy with one copy of.
And then we've got Illidanri as well, and I think Spencer had a lot of success last year with elves in kind of the middle to late portion of the year, and I think that's obviously the main application. But I don't know, like this might be good enough in red green or in like green white monsters or something like that as well. It just has a lot of text and gets you quite a bit of advantage as well. What do you think on Illidanri, Spencer?
I quite like it. I think it's good in elves. I think would you ever build, there's some people online that have been doing good with green black elves. Elves is always okay. It will never be amazing. But the days of Cradle of dominating the format are, more than a decade ago. So I don't think anyone needs to worry about these sorts of cards. I will say that it's got the magical wording of elf, with a card draw ability essentially. The tap thing, maybe that comes up with Atraxa. But I've been really impressed with Elven Chorus. And I think that style of effect in a lot of elf, low CMC elf builds that have moved away from like planeswalkers and more to like low to mid CMC creatures. They're trying to actually combo with card draw. This is the kind of card for, and it's good.
Nice. Yeah, I think I like this potentially to try in like bug natural order or something as well, just as like a safety valve to put the targets into play potentially. So I don't know. I think it's very good for sure. Sasha, anything to add on El
Nope.
Damri? Well, we'll let you kick it off on the last one on the slide here. I did see Spencer with this in play, I think, about birthing ritual, and I didn't actually think this was good enough, to be honest, but Spencer's much more apt to be casting it than me. So what's your first impression on it, Sasha? And then we'll get Spencer, who actually has had it in play.
Yeah. I've had this meme for a long time that it's like, if you have a card that you think is good in any 60 card format, and it has the words, look at the top X cards of your deck for Y condition, it's probably trash in Highlander. Cards like Collected Company is the really historic example of this, where it's the deck building considerations are trivial in 60 card, and they are incredibly non-trivial in Highlander. I do think, based on, I have to believe a certain amount of what Spencer's told me in terms of the kinds of like very, very creature decks, combo decks that you can play. I can imagine this card thriving. And I think that it is notable that you get to look at the cards first. The fact you can actually downgrade the casting cost. So, say I have a 2-drop like a Voice of Resurgence, and I find like another 2-drop. I can still sack the Voice to get that 2-drop into play, and I just don't go up the chain. I think if it didn't have that wording on it, the card would be like F tier. I think with that wording, I think it's an interesting card for like very creature dense decks. Like we're talking 40 plus creatures probably to unlock it as a real card.
What were your first impressions of playing with this one, Spencer?
I slotted into a couple secret builds for like a Monday or two, and then a couple testing sessions, and I thought it was quite good. Vostu has been playing with some Bant Seeker, has been a big fan of it on the Discord as well. It is pretty good. I think it's good in Seeker value piles or mid-range creature combo where you're just trying to like churn through your deck. If you're the kind of deck that's playing the walls, so essentially the walls package of like Wall of Omens, if you're playing like Ice Codals, if you're playing Strixes, lots of ETBs on 2. And most Seeker decks have a ton of 2s, either because they're copying lists or because they realize why, which is the Neo form and Birthing Pod. You need to have X number of CMC2 creatures. You want them to have ETBs so they have value, and then you recur them with your 3 CMCs or you combo off. So Birthing Ritual is often like just churning for a good 3 CMC to put into play because you probably have your 2s in play, or if you're just playing on turn 2, maybe you're like putting one of your mana dorks into a wall to draw a card, or a Sylvan Curated, or a mana source into. I liked it. I thought it was quite good. I think
Were you playing it in your Nadu deck?
no, it's too slow.
Okay.
I'd see this as like the same way that I think Birthing Pod's a bit too slow in like some of the other creature combo decks. I think if you're trying to like grind if you're playing Birthing Pod, I think you should also play Birthing Ritual. If you're a creature deck that is focused on CMC2, ETB triggers, 3 recursion, and then you also like if you build your curve that way. If you're like playing Kiki Pod, I don't think it's good at all. If you're playing Seeker, I think it's pretty good. Or like those kind of decks, I think it's fine. I think that being something to do on 2, and then you do gain like an incremental mana advantage by putting these creatures in play, as long as there's an advantage to doing so, is pretty powerful. And I think it's good.
Nice. Cool. Thanks. That breaks it down really well. So just a couple more interesting cards to note in green. We do have Springheart and Tuco, which is the bane of my existence now. But I actually think this card's quite good and kind of slots into a bunch of different decks. And I know, Spencer, you were playing it in the aforementioned Nadu combo deck. Outside of that kind of obvious application, do you think this kind of slots into the creature combo as well? Just like the ability to make copies of something at such a low cost is quite enticing.
Yeah, I think it probably has like some potential. Just being a 1/1 such a boner killer. The landfall trigger obviously quite strong in like a lands deck or any fast spawn deck. So I think there's like some excitement for people that are playing lands and being an enchantment. And I think in those decks it's quite good. But yeah, I think if you're a secret deck that's playing Nadu, which you probably should be, then you're probably playing this card. And on its own as like a mid-range like value engine, getting more creatures in play for Skull Clamp, it's like very good.
I think also like I mean I think it's obviously kind of magical Christmas landy, but if you're in like an initiative heavy deck and you just bestow it, and all of a sudden you can like churn through the dungeon incredibly quickly. So again, I know that's not something that's going to happen a lot, but it's definitely something that can come up on a card that already kind of does provide a lot of value. Anything
The
else to
opportunity,
add? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Spencer.
yeah, like the opportunity cost is low, which I think's important. Like
Yeah,
if you're trying to do this like cute initiative things, and like we've all seen like people that are either going like turbo initiative in like various metas, where they just like they're on Chrome Mox plus like Spirit Guides, etc. And people have had a lot of success with that builds, or like they're just trying to blink initiative. And like people have had a lot of success with those builds as well. So I think this kind of slots into those as
yeah, exactly. Anything to add on?
Going on to Sowing Myco Spawn, I actually think this card is like so Springheart on Tuco, very, very good in lands decks, in addition to all these other ones. I think Sowing Myco Spawn is like a substantial upgrade for the lands deck, specifically like the Glacial Chasm ones. It's not just like a strictly better Reap and Sow, both in the sense that it has a creature attached to it, but also it's uncounterable in terms of the land search effect. And that matters a lot into a lot of matchups that the like slower Glacial Chasm decks struggle into, which tend to be blue control decks that really have a hard time, or that can control that slower combo shells, slower combo. So like you need to develop the mana a lot to get to the point of comboing your opponent. It requires a lot of pieces. These pieces are usually like 3 mana, which is a lot for a combo card. Sowing Myco Spawn, I think, is a great upgrade for those decks. It's obviously a better Reap and Sow for the Paradox Academy decks, and it's a really great way for even mid-range decks that like are playing Dark Depths and are trying to go and kill your opponent that way to tutor out like Urza's Saga in an uncounterable way and just hose your opponent that's going to be stuck with all these counter spells in hand.
Yeah, like I think also just of note, like it puts the land into play untapped. So even just like play pattern of Elf or Mox, Soul Mana, whatever, into this early, getting Strip Mine or Wasteland, this has like huge applications.
Becoming a mana ritual with Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's another one. Like I think this card is fantastic. We'll see a lot of play and probably will almost never get kicked. But when it does, watch out. Acidic slime on steroids. Anything to add on this fungus, Spencer?
no, I think you guys covered it. I think it's good in lands decks, and I think it's I've had it cast against me a couple times actually in like lands X decks, and it was always very strong.
Yeah, 6 is another interesting one where like my first thought was like, how can I just recur Time Walk a million times with this? But it's I don't know, it's very interesting, very powerful, but I don't know 100% like what it's slotting into automatically. Like I think the deck building constrictions for it are very interesting, and like I've been just trying to build blue Bant, I guess, Bant Time Walk shells and trying to slot it in, and then it's like, oh well, I still have to be able to continually attack with it to loop it, and I don't know, it's interesting, and I think it's on rate, it's not like terrible anyway. So I think it's like worth trying in a lot of different decks, but I don't know exactly what it's going to be a standout in, apart from maybe like I think like lands decks. We've been memeing on them for a few sets now, but I definitely think they're like fairly functional and real now. And I don't know if this makes it into all of them, but I think all of them will at least try it. Do you see those applications and more, Sasha, or what do you think?
So I definitely agree with you that the lands mid-range decks, and honestly just lands as a whole, have gotten a lot of very important upgrades from this set to the point where it's something that I actually want to investigate in a real way. I think 6 is a slam dunk in every single mid-range lands shell, and not because of the first 2 lines of text, but just the last one. The ability to recursively kill your opponent's things with like Lightning Bolt or Fatal Push. If you've ever resolved a Renin 6 emblem in Modern, you'll know how ridiculously powerful that is. And the fact that 6 kind of does a good imitation of the kind of recursion that you get that you need to build up to reach that emblem, I think means that it's going to be very, very good in those mid-range shells. Outside of like, this is a card I don't expect to break through past Lance decks though. I think that if you're playing like even a 2-color mid-range deck, you maybe still don't reach for a 6. That could be wrong, and it could be that there are 2-color decks that do want him, but I think broadly he's going to be capped at a Lance card only.
What do you think, Spencer? Like, does this get into, I don't know, is there any like Seeker Time Walk decks or something that want to play this, or just kind of strictly lands combo kind of shells?
I think it's strictly lands, and I think it's a little bit too slow for them, but I've been wrong. It's hard to evaluate lands cards these days.
We do have the green kind of flagship mythic in Grist. I'll be honest, I have basically no experience with or against this card. I assume just based on lineage that it's quite good, based on all the other flipwalkers being at the very least playable. But Spencer, I'll maybe just pass it off to you as someone who might play this. I don't know. What do you think of Grist?
I like it. I've put it in like my kind of Abzen shells. It's exciting in those lists. I think you have to be playing like Aluris, Extraction, Renegade Rally, or package like Pure Form Aware, like Unearth, Helping or Healing Hands, Reanimate. Like I think you need about 4 or 5 of those kind of cards. It's really kind of like be like, okay, I'm like potentially like flipping Grist for value, like late game. Like, ideally you cast it, trades up, and then it's something that sits in your graveyard, and then when you recur, maybe you get this off of it, and then I think you're looking pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, Sasha, do you have anything to add?
I think that Spencer, you'll end up cutting it from that deck pretty soon. At
Yeah.
least like, I think that the density of cards you need to make the flip consistent in a way that's in any way analogous to 60 card is too high for any deck with like the possible exception of Black Mold that plays all of the 1 mana 2/1 recursive threats to actually achieve. Now, that being said, I think it'll take a long time because I think a 1/2 Death Touch for 1 green is actually a really good stat line in our format right now. So I do want to give it that like very strong caveat that this card is super annoying, and it will stick around to, in theory, reach that point of flipping. I just don't think there are that many decks that can earnestly claim to have the density required to make the flip consistent.
I agree with you. I think that its stat line alone would not be playable, and then you kind of like poker fallacy yourself into saying like, but the EV on this like potential thing of happening is so high and like the value is so big. So then you're kind of like, well, I'll just play this low. Like I wouldn't play a 1/2 Death Touch for 1, but because this other potential being so high, I'm willing to take this risk. And even if it like rarely flips in any game, I think like most people would be surprised that like a 1/2 Death Touch is actually like very irritating. As anyone who's faced a Baleful Strix could tell you, just a Death Touch creature in our format, it's always trading up for like quite a high value card. Yeah, so I think that a lot of the decks will just keep playing it until the format speeds up to a different type of speed, or people aren't playing cards like One Nota or Questing Beast, or they're not a good example, but just like powerful like 3s and 4s that attack.
I think of note too, this is like a very good card to unearth. So like if you're in that kind of shell, that's pretty sweet of a line to do as well.
If WotC gets around to printing 6 more unearths, we'll be cooking.
Yeah, exactly. So there's definitely some fantastic 2-color multicolor cards in this set. The standouts for me so far have definitely been Psychic Frog and Flage. Was playing Psychic Frog the last 2 weeks, and it single-handedly won me probably 3 games between those 2 tournaments. Don't really have to work very hard to make it win the game for you, and I think it's just like you'd have to convince me pretty hard to not play this in any deck that can cast it for the most part. Just especially if you have like any graveyard synergies, that's it basically. I don't know. Maybe it's not good enough in like 4-color decks, but I think it's just an absurd card. I think it probably is good enough, but
I think if you are in blue-black and you are not a Storm combo deck, you are like mandatory to include this card. to the point where like I would almost even say a deck that like Time Vault maybe wants to play Psychic Frog. Like I think it's that good, and it's really the card that I was talking about earlier when referring to like Nethergoyf and Paragoyf. Like I think it really substantially changes the math in terms of where the blue mid-range decks want to be at.
Yeah, I mean I've been building a lot of blue-black decks, and I think that's another deck that has enough card quality now to be in 2 colors, and it's a lot of the reason is just the absolutely huge upgrade in your creature suite in the last couple of sets. Yeah, I mean, this is my personal favorite card in the set, and I really like it. I've been playing it in Modern. I've been playing it in this Grixis deck I've been playing, and yeah, I'll be probably casting it a lot over the next year. My special super foil frog is currently on its way to me. Spencer, anything else, or is this just kind of a gloss over All-Star?
It's great. I mean, yeah, I agree with you guys' points. It's a super good card. Every time I play against it, it reminds me of dating myself, but the wild mongrel days of madness and just like how like blocking it just becomes extremely difficult, and it's really difficult to trade. And the fact that this Shadowmane Infiltrators you is ridiculous.
Yeah, of note too, like it even does that when you don't planeswalkers, which those kind of cards don't usually do that. Like Ragavan or other cards usually only trigger off player damage, but you can even finish off like a Teferi or whatever with it, and then it still draws you the card. Incredible. Flage, I think, is pretty interesting. I don't know that it's going in every deck that can cast it like Psychic Frog is. I've been playing like a Jeskai hard control list just the last couple days, and it's been good there. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I don't think it's going to make it into every Jeskai list, but it just is notably a card that can go to the graveyard early, and then be found later on when you do have the ability to escape. But red, white is not super easy to achieve in a lot of decks, and especially in Jeskai that's like base hard blue. What do you think of this in like 3-4 color control list, Sasha? And does this make it in like a Boros mid-range kind of, or Boros like the Winota decks maybe, or even
like Blood and Taxes?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I definitely like. I think for Jeskai and a lot of the Omniscitive decks, like this is just a slam dunk. Obviously, the casting cost is very steep, and unlike a card like Uro, which is both already half in one of the colors that you want, but also half in your least favorite color, the thing that Uro actually gives you is the chance to draw off of it. So it actually digs you a little bit further to find the extra land drop to then cast the Uro. And more to the point, if you find like a fetch land off of Uro, it lets you get the Triome that gets you to that second green source. Flage doesn't do that. So I do think that you'll see, like, I think this is a card that maybe pushes the Jeskai green control shells, the ones playing Recall, into more of a straight Jeskai deck, just because it'll be a lot easier to facilitate the casting cost and feel a little bit better about losing Uro if they gain this card. So I think it is going to live pretty much perpetually in the Jeskai shell. In terms of the Boros and Taxes deck, I think that remains to be seen. Delving 5 cards is actually a really steep cost in that deck. That deck also tends to not be a double red shell. It's very much a like mono white deck splashing just in a couple incidental red sources. So I think it's more going to be a Boros mid-range card than a straight Blood and Taxes card, but that may change over time, and I certainly expect that deck to shift to become more of a straight Boros deck and start cutting the kind of white cards in favor of more red-white and 1 red pipped cards.
Fair. Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, and I kind of agree on most of those points for sure. You see any other applications, Spencer? Or is that pretty much it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great card and rate, but I don't know. It's hard to see like the full slot on it. I mean, we'll see.
Weight of the Reliquary. Honestly, like even like a couple months ago, I wouldn't have that highly of this card. Now, just like Jason or a player locally, Jason's been having a lot of success with like a green black monsters shell, where I think this would be super interesting. And then obviously, like I feel like this is almost a meme at this point. This card has lands applications as well. Just being able to search for lands at a reasonably low cost, depending on how you've built your deck, is a very interesting card. I think probably I don't know. I don't actually think I would play this in heavy lands package decks, but I think it will see play and enable potentially like decks like green black monsters to have like more access to their strip mine or wasteland or Gaia's Cradle at the cost of like sacrificing a Birds of Paradise or something. Do you think it goes beyond that, Spencer? Or like I don't know. I don't see lands heavy decks playing this, but like black green is kind of a weird pip on a 2-drop in our format.
I think if you're a black green or black green X deck, you want this card. I mean, often in most of those decks, even if they're a fair deck, just being able to find Saga is incredibly powerful. Gaia's Cradle. There's lots of other powerful cards in lands packages now, just for like a fair lands package. Just another way to find a like strip or a waste for a mana denial plan. And it just incidentally, like I think a lot of people slept on Fiend Artisan's like +1/+1 ability, but like the fact that like late game you kind of draw these cards and all of a sudden they're like a 6/6 for like 2 mana. It has the hidden keyword that I think's becoming more relevant in our format, which is vigilance. Not only turning on its ability, but and making it grow, but also just like being able to be a defensive and offensive powerhouse. Yeah, this card's amazing. I think it's really good. It's another card that makes me pull towards like black when I'm thinking of like green X decks.
Sasha, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I actually think that this is a card that people will probably misevaluate, and Spencer really alluded to that with what he said. But I think this is actually more of a creature card than it is a lands card. Obviously, like it's a card that evokes Knight of the Reliquary. That's like iconic lands card. But the fact that you need the fuel to start it going, I think is, and the fact that there are so many just like good mid-range lands that you can play, not just in terms of white, not just in terms of Urza Saga and Wasteland, but also like Gaia's Cradle. You have that new land that connives that we're going to explicitly not talk about in this set. But there are a suite of utility lands that you can get, and it means that the cost of that land entering play tapped is also heavily reduced because you just frankly don't care as much. It also kind of has the Psychic Frog text of whenever you attack with White of the Reliquary, your opponent has really awkward blocks because it has a way to pump its spell that when it's attacking. So I think it's going to end up being like a staple in any green-black X and potentially even green-black XX creature decks.
I've played against it twice, and both times it was extremely difficult to deal with, more than I thought it would even be. So
I support any card that incentivizes me to put Colony Garden into my deck.
Now it's time. It's time to talk about the bird. Yeah. So I just obviously talking about Nadu. I don't know what they were thinking when they printed this card. I remain convinced that they mistemplated it or meant it to mean something else because this card is just insane. It's insane on rate alone, and then just having all the combo applications attached to it. I'll pass it over to Spencer just because he has more experience playing with it at this point, but it would not shock me if this card was a point or caused creature combo cards to be further pointed than they are currently. I think this card is absolutely ridiculous and promotes really horrible play patterns. That is my naughty rant. Please continue.
What's one of the problem cards of like non-deterministic combo? Me and Sash were talking about this. I think all the Nadu decks that I've been brainstorming with and talking to other people who are talking about it a lot often compare it to the Brain Freeze Breach lines, where like unfortunately like it's not deterministic, so you actually have to go through a lot of it, even if you're like 90 to like 97%, depending on how you build your deck. Sometimes your early flips are like low percentage, but like to be clear, like a non-combo, like not winning the turn you combo with this card still is usually like draw 12 cards, which normally like buries a game anyway. So it's almost annoying because like the other person sometimes doesn't scoop, but you're like, but I've won. Like it's the game's over essentially once you've like gone through like at least like 6 triggers. If you have a Nomads in core, like the game is over because like worst case scenario, you're drawing 8 cards, typically. Yeah. Exactly. I think people just also misread this that didn't see it to play with it yet in Modern or Legacy. Just that obviously with Nomads in core, everyone went to shoot go first, but it's like Nomads in core is like the one that's busted. A, it's instant speed that you can't really interact with it. And then B, just being able to like pass and do it again. So if you quote unquote whiff, you can still draw like 24 to 36 cards, put a lot of those lands to play, interact with the opponent's turn. If someone else isn't playing a combo deck and they get to Nadu, they've won. I just like it's almost impossible for them to come back from it. It's extremely powerful. The card's cracked. Like I don't know what to say. I started playing Seeker with it, and it quickly was like, what's the point of getting Seeker when you can get Nadu? And then now just kind of drop Seeker. I don't know what the best Nadu version of the deck is yet, but if you're in these colors and you're playing creature deck, like you should be playing this card. If you're playing Seeker, this is like your primary. I'd say this is like now your like primary win con is Seeker's your backup plan. In case they somehow like Nadu gets exiled or something. And that's pretty much it. Yeah. It's cracked. I don't know what else to say. Anyone that like if you're playing creature decks in these colors and you're playing Matadorks, you should play this card. You should play Nomads and Core, and you should play Shuko. And that even if you're doing anything else with your deck, like you should play those three cards if you're in these colors and playing creatures. You know, just play 34 to 38 creatures, and you'll probably consistently go off if you have like 36 to 38 lands. And then we could talk about getting way more degenerate another day with this card, but you know, I'm on like Summoner's Pact for like Nedtuku, like Field Crop Rot stuff, and like Lotus Cobra stuff, and like I think now my percentage of going off is like quite high. It like I said, we and Sash were talking earlier, like it feels very much like Brain Freeze Breach.
This card is very good. I find it so funny that this is a card that I had listed like when I was thinking about it, like, oh yeah, this is kind of like we got a better Leovold. It's a little bit less restrictive to cast, it's a bit bigger, has flying. Yeah, it seems good. I did not fully expect it to be just this ridiculously cracked as a creature combo card. And I look forward to living in the renaissance of Nadu combo. Long live Bird.
Oh yeah. So Spencer like not playing slow at all took like a 13-minute turn against me where I had to wait it out because I had Thoracle kill in my hand, or like one on top of my library and one piece in my hand. So I had to like wait and see like, okay, like, and he hadn't revealed endurance to me on any of the Nadu triggers, but it turned out he had it in his hand anyway. But like it, as he said, it is definitely going to be a card that is a griefer card because people are gonna like not scoot because they're not technically dead, but like unless you're playing A plus B combo, like you're dead. you're not ever winning the game if they start doing anything with this card.
That's the thing that like I don't think people kind of grasp yet is that combo like fully, and by that I mean like win the turn that you go off, which is pretty likely if your deck's constructed correctly. Like your majority positive percentage. If you have 3 or 4 creatures out, you're likely to continue going off. If your deck's built to combo with like the lands ETB triggers, like you're very likely to go off. Then you will win that turn. But even if you like whiff and draw 16 cards, or like put 6 lands into play and draw like 8 cards, like you've won. Like it's very difficult for a fair deck to come back from that. Like they're not winning the game. Like they might play another turn or two because maybe you just have like 12 lands in play, maybe it's turn 4 or turn 3 and like 7 lands in play. You have like a bunch of creatures in play and you have like a full hand and you have like they think that the game's going to continue on, but it's probably not. They're not going to win. Like it's pretty they're extremely low percentage. Unlike other combo decks where like basically it's the feeling of like recall, but like several times over.
It's also really notable that when you compare this card to Seeker, which I mean recently had 2 points taken off of it, and it's still probably much worse than Nadu combo. Seeker is a card that you always want to sandbag your tutors for, because the problem that it creates is that if you get it early and you telegraph that you have it with something like an Eldamri's Call or a Worldly Tutor, your opponent will just hold up remove for it. And you, in turn, are kind of priced into not playing it because, they're just respond to the trigger, or they'll have ways to interact with it, and it's going to be very tempo negative in a way that, if you Eldamri's Call for Nadu and put Nadu into play and your opponent removes it, you've gotten a card out of it. You've actually 2-for-1 to your opponent. Like, the floor on it is literally so high, and the ceiling on it is just astronomical. Like, I am stunned this card got printed.
Like the CEDH players are on it, like Joking's already like posted a video about it. Like Modern, Legacy, like every format's just like, okay, yeah, like the hype's real. This card's pretty mangled. I think it won't take long before people just start playing against it or with it to understand. And then when they play against a deck that's built around comboing it, it's not just like shoved into like their whatever 4-color pile, then I think they'll be like, oh, I didn't know that it was like that cracked. And then I think people will be like, okay, well, what do we like? This is not very fun, and like whatever that'll happen, I guess. But
until
Yeah.
then, Bird Renaissance.
Yeah, I definitely see this. As I said, like I will be pretty shocked if this card isn't pointed by the end of the year.
I don't think it's a point-worthy card necessarily, but I think that it's
We can revisit that
we
one.
can revisit that at some point when it puts up some more like it needs to put a bunch of tournament wins, obviously. And people
Yeah, or I
but I
should
think
say
the problematic cards are the cards that surround it. Like Urza's Saga is like another card that really enables this card, as is like crop rotation and you know the suit of unpointed creature tutors.
Yeah, I guess that I should clarify that. Like I will, maybe this isn't a point. I think this will have a large impact on the points list one way or another, even if itself is not pointed.
Even if it's like, just everyone recognizing that Seeker plus Nadu combo is just too much to handle for like most players, unless they're playing an AB combo deck that's faster.
Yeah, it's also notable that, like, I mean, what you said about the points list, a card that's still on there is Survival of the Fittest, and we recently took off Birthing Pod. We can look very smart about that right now, where Survival is a card that's much better with Nadu than Birthing Pod. So we get to pat ourselves on the back for that accidental W. But aside from that, Nadu, great card.
Yeah, no, yada yada yada. You're playing it.
Yeah,
it's probably the most impactful card from the set.
Yes, unquestionably. So yeah, we're going. We can kind of gloss over and just mention that this set did give us a multitude of playable, both dual land and come into play untapped at the cost of 3 life land spells. I think a lot of them, like I don't even really want to talk about them individually necessarily, but just the fact that they exist is really cool and probably has some applications for like Charbelcher being slightly less of a meme or something. But I know like I played Waterlogged Teachings in my Grixis deck and had it be a land and had it tutor for something. So I think a lot of them, if not all of them, are playable. I think the white-blue one is terrible, but I think the other ones are all like at least playable in their 2-color, the dual land ones, and then the single-color ones are all to some extent playable. Obviously, some better than others. Like the blue one, Sunken Stupor, is very good.
So.
But yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on any of these, like individually, or I just kind of lump them together because I don't think any of them are gigantic upgrades. But what do you? I
actually think they occupy very different spots. Where I think Waterlogged Teachings has some very specific decks that it's good in. I think if you're playing Ancestral Recall in your deck, you are actually contractually obligated to include this card in it. This is just Lord and Revealed number 2 for any Recall deck, so you will be including it, and you should be. Even if your deck only has blue, you will still be including Waterlogged Teachings in your deck with Recall. So I think that's notable. It's not a giant upgrade, but it is one. I think Revitalizing Repast is like the second best of the multicolored ones, but I would leave it up to Spencer in terms of how good that kind of card is, just because it protects more decks that he plays.
Yeah, I've had it cast against me several times already, and I think it's quite good. I would play it in a lot of decks that I play. I think Waterlogged Teachings also had a cast against me a couple times and it was very good. A lot of these cards are super hard to evaluate at first, and then you just realize that like the more they print these sort of like land spells, the better. Like I think it's actually just good for the game because like for lots of obvious reasons, lets people like combat flood and be able to cast spells and stuff like that. So it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I would basically err on the side of including as many of these as you can and cut them as they annoy you is kind of where I'm at. Like I played 3 of them last week in Grixis, and a couple of them annoyed me. Like I ended up cutting Augur Trawler because it just wasn't in that shell I was in, wasn't kind of worth it. But yeah, I would recommend starting high on them and working your way backwards to like where it's like, well, if the effect is literally never good, then remove it. But
yeah,
I do think very, very high on these.
I do think that these cards are, in a way that in 3-color decks, I agree with you, Willie. Like, I think that you do need to find a reasonable spot, and you probably curtail it to like, oh, I probably want to be a Sink into Stupor deck. Maybe I'm a Fellow Profane deck. Maybe I'm a Disciple of Fraley's deck. I think for 2-color decks, and especially 1-color decks, you're just playing them all. Like,
Yeah.
and not the 2-color ones that enter play tapped, like the monocolor ones that bolt you to play untapped. I think if you are a Death and Taxes deck, you are playing Witch Enchanter, you're playing Razorgrass Ambush. I think if you're a Boros deck, you're playing the 2 other red ones. I think if you're mono red, you're playing the 2 other red ones. I think these are cards that are just going to really push 2-color and 1-color decks, and I'm really happy to see them exist in our format because we just need as many incentives as possible to play less colors. And it's really nice to see very powerful ones in these, and frankly, free ones that other decks will have a harder time exploiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know I added Pinnacle Monk to my Prowess deck. And I haven't played a tournament with it or anything yet, but it was like, oh, this is sweet. Like, I think, yeah, these are awesome cards. I'm very happy they exist.
Ooh, on the Charbelcher note, I have tested it. It seems bad, but nowhere near as bad as it has been in the past. It's definitely like a tier 2, tier 3 deck, but the fact that it's there, I think, is very interesting and very cool.
Yeah, so just kind of glossing over on the real lands, obviously the big news on the lands is cheaper fetch lands for everyone, which is great for budget conscious players. Getting $15 Windswept Heaths or $18 Polluted Deltas is excellent. But obviously reprint, so we don't really need to talk about them. I do think I was very, very high on Shifting Woodland when it was spoiled. I've become less high on it since. I think it's still like a fine card, but incidentally getting Delirium is not super easy, and especially like green is kind of a color awkwardly unless you're playing like a lands deck or something that it might struggle with that a little bit. So yeah, I think it's good. I don't think it's a slam dunk into every deck at all, but it's a very interesting card for sure. What do you think on Shifting Woodland, Spencer?
I actually think it's kind of like I think if most of the green mid-range decks like should be playing it probably. I think it's very strong. I think that you're right about Incidental Delirium is actually kind of difficult, but you know, think about like the bug or green X no pro or sorry no Atraxa decks that we're seeing kind of pop up or have popped up in the past. Even like the lands decks, bug control and bug mid range. I just think it has a lot of like eligible targets that kind of becomes good. The opportunity cost is quite low, so I'm pretty into it. I think if you're playing creature combo, it's also quite strong. Yeah, it's definitely like one of the high value lands that's shifted me towards certain decks for sure.
Nice. Anything to add, Sasha? Am I missing anything other than trying to magical Christmas land Omniscience into your graveyard?
Well, it's funny you say that. I was actually actively trying to figure out a Glacial Chasm combo deck that eschewed the conventional Thoracle Potlash kill, specifically for this card plus Omniscience as a kind of extremely resilient and already on plan, and since that's a land, way to kill your opponent. I have long since trashed that plan, and I really do agree with Spencer that this is just a low-cost inclusion for creature combo decks. But Glacial Chasm decks do get a nice upgrade in Urza's Cave, which is just a sick card to put Glacial Chasm into play and functionally get another copy of that deck or that card in your deck at the cost of 3 mana.
Yeah, I think like I know a lot of decks have turned away from playing like Dark Depth Stage. I think we're going to see a bit of a resurgence of it just because there's a lot of cards where the opportunity cost to fetch them is so low now that it is going to kind of start popping up a bit more again. Urza's Cave is slam dunk. Great card for any deck that has utility lands. I mean, even I don't know, you might play this in like mono green, red green, even like just searching for Gaia's Cradle. I don't know. Like I just think it's the opportunity cost of it just being a colorless land isn't that bad if you're in 1 to 2 colors.
I appreciate what you said about the Dark Depths deck. One of the cards that we didn't talk about is Mutated Cultist, which is basically just a on cast trigger 3 mana hex mage for Dark Depths. And I think that plus this card really does reinvigorate that archetype in a big way. And specifically, those two cards have this strong colorless incentive to them. So I think we'll probably end up seeing like a black-green Depths deck start to rise to emergence, and potentially just like a black-green, very, very light splash of another color.
Yeah.
Also, important to note that this card is just like probably one of the biggest pickups to Time Vault in a while.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
I'm like searching. Oh, and it's like, oh right, yeah, no, yeah, that's insane. And also notably gets Urza's Saga as well. So I think it's a very high-powered card for sure.
Yeah, I think whenever you look at like a search for lands card, I think it's funny because like we're like, oh, maybe there's like this nebulous lands deck out there in Brewer's Paradise, but really like if anything, the lands deck right now is Time Vault, or like out of like the tier 1 decks anyway. It's just like consistently finding like these two lands that do it all for it. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then just kind of touching on Arena of Glory as the interesting red land. I don't know. I definitely misread this card at first and thought it like added mana and was like, what? This ramps and gives haste? This is the best land of all time. It does not do that, viewers / listeners. But I do think that like red, obviously the opportunity cost of playing this in mono red is very low. And I think you're probably playing it there, and I would probably play it in like red, white, and red, green based monsters or creature decks as well. But I wouldn't have like super high expectations of it winning the game a lot or something. It's a lot to do. Like it's not accelerating, and then also like leaving it tapped so you can't play a follow-up threat the turn after is a fairly large cost to give a creature haste.
I also think it's notable that in the decks that can consistently have the center play untapped, the kind of threats that you'd be casting with Arena of Glory on like 2 and 3 almost certainly have haste already. So I think the value it'll extract is quite low, and I think it was important that we talked about it just because it's a flashy card that has gotten some hype before the set released.
Yeah, I do think if you're on like Rabble Masters still, or like those ilk, and like there are brands of monsters that are still playing them, like this is very good with Legion Warboss, Rabble Master, cards like that. So we'll say it has a decent amount of value with cards like that. Yeah, not a ton of notable artifacts in this set, which is interesting. I think I have been toying with like a kind of super moon land hate deck and have included Winter Moon. I have not drawn it yet, but I do think again punishing 4-color greedy decks. I will always be on board for these type of effects, and notably, obviously, upgrade over Winter Orb in 1-color decks, 2-color decks, even where you can untap 3 lands to your opponent's 1. I do think this is worth and seeing kind of how it goes. I don't have high hopes for it just because Winter Orb hasn't really been very good in a long time. But Spencer, do you think this makes the cut in much or not? Not really.
I have an OG signed Winter Orb, so I just can't do it dirty like that.
Perfect. And moving on.
Oh, before.
Oh, unless, sorry, do you have something to add?
I'd just like to postulate. I think this card is so bad, and I look forward to all the monocolor pilots, including it, and then eventually realizing that it's not worth it even in those decks.
Fair. So we have talked we tried to frame a lot of our discussion today just around what cards we think are going and upgrading kind of the top decks or kind of the more meta decks that we see. One card that we didn't really talk about actually, or a couple, like blue-white X Control got a huge upgrade in Wrath of the Skies. I've been playing this. I actually cast this card like 4 times in Highlander today. It is really, really good. I think it has potential to be like the best Wrath in the format for those decks. Just like wiping Time Vault boards,
killing Urza's Saga
at a very
and
low
the
cost.
constructs.
Yes, sweeping Urza's Saga for 3 mana including the artifact that it searched for, like sweeping everything it's created. I really, really like this card. I think also I've been messing around with having like a Muddle the Mixture package in my control decks, and this is notably a Wrath that you can transmute for with Muddle the Mixture. Yeah, super high on this card. I think it's really, really good, and we'll see a ton of play
in blue-white control.
In blue-white, well, and Jeskai, like Esper, any variation of blue-white X control. I'm absolutely playing this card.
I think it's very good. I forgot about it earlier, actually. I think this card's nuts.
Yeah, and Sasha, you want to just have a little convo about Glyph Elemental?
Hey, you remember Bristly Bill, that card that ended up being pretty okay? This is your second copy of it. It's worse, but it's still similar. So in your mid-range lands decks that have white, you should probably be playing Glyph Elemental. I think it'll be perfectly fine. Is it going to be that great? No. Is it going to be better than Bristly Bill? No. Is it going to be good enough? Yeah, probably in your dumb lands deck. So play it there. Don't play it elsewhere.
Yeah, blue-red tempo, just another. I've been interested to play with Dreamtide Whale in like a Murktide shell. I have been updating my Murktide deck slowly, and this has made the cut so far. 7/5 for 3 mana is just gigantic. It's just a huge body, and typically the blue-red decks do struggle a little bit with like gaining the initiative or blocking bigger creatures if they get through your counters, and this helps immensely in both cases. And like 2 spells a turn every second turn or something is not really that difficult to achieve. So I have only drawn this card once, so it's on mostly theory at this point. But as someone who enjoys casting Rotting Regisaur, I'm super into Dreamtide Whale and look forward to drawing it a bit more to see. What do you think of the whale here, Sasha?
I think it's the reason why it is mostly just an update to blue-red tempo is because that's a deck that really is hurting for threats. Like, there's a reason why people talk about including things like Cryptic Serpent or Tolarian Terror or the
Sailor's Bane.
Thank you, that card. This is a card that fills the same role, but is way less restrictive in terms of the cost associated with it. The fact that it's like we have a litmus test in terms of how easy it is to cast that second spell in the form of Ledger Shredder really consistently, and this is just a big dumb idiot that attacks with it. I think this card's going to be really good in blue-red tempo, and I think that for the decks that aren't hurting for those big threats, like I think you're not going to see this. Like I'd be very surprised to see this card show up in a like blue-red deck or a rogue deck or a rogue deck without Berserk and Ambitious Pilot, I should say.
Yeah, so just touching on a couple graveyard-centered cards. We have Chthonian. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that. Nightmare, just kind of baby recurring nightmare. Do you think this card's interesting? I would imagine, like, I don't know if maybe this gets into Robin's like initiative chaining nightmare of a deck in Mardu. But I definitely think it has some interesting applications of just being a second recurring nightmare for decks that aren't trying to put a fatty into play and are just trying to like chain value, which, as we're kind of saying, the metagame should be moving away from. I know a lot of people will not be moving away from it because it's how they like to play the game. Spencer, is this like interesting or playable at all, do you think?
Maybe Chthonian Nightmare's a bit faster than like recurring nightmare stuff, but maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I think if you're playing recurring nightmare, it's worth looking at. But I don't know how many good decks are playing recurring nightmare is kind of the problem.
Yeah, like of these 3 cards, I think Marionette Apprentice has the clearest homes. Like if you're playing a tokens deck, you're going to play it. If you're playing Aristocrats, you're going to play it. I think Chthonian Nightmare and Ripples of Undeath are 2 cards that don't have clear homes, and it'll be interesting to see if they do find one, in particular Nightmare. I do agree with you, Willie, that if you are playing Recurring Nightmare, you probably want to play Baby Recurring Nightmare. But I am curious if there is a shell that can really abuse it, and it's an archetype that I hope to see more of.
Yeah, so some very interesting red deck wins goblins kind of bees, basically. Like, I think Amped Raptor is very good in Red Deck Wins and in Blitz, notably, like Red Green Blitz or Red White Blitz. Just getting 2 cards for 2 mana is very good in those shells. Reckless Pyro Surfer, another great Red Deck Wins card, and I will play it in Blitz as well, to be honest. Just 2 mana, 2/2 haste is like kind of riding the line of playable in that deck anyway, and then getting the upside of having fetches give your team +2/+0 other than it is very good. And Mog Mob is probably a Goblins only card. I don't know. I mean, it might actually, I don't know, I might play it in Red Deck Wins as well. I think it's at least close, but I know a lot of those decks are favoring a very, very low curve and not playing any 3s, so it's probably not the best 3 that you can play in that case, but I think it's at least a discussion point. And being able to like nuke 2 creatures or something to clear the way is a nice option as well. But yeah, Red got some nice upgrades here. Hey, Spencer, just in general.
Yeah, I like them all. I think Mob, Goblins has so many activated abilities now. I wonder like how long before they just like play the Soul Cauldron almost as like their graveyard hate piece / like combo enabler.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That would be very, very good with that. Sasha, do you have anything to add, or are we just these are just staples? Hey,
These are good cards. I think the one note to say is that I think there will be RDW players who will not want to include Amped Raptor because they'll be scared of hitting their Fire Blast or hitting their Lelia or their Broadside Bombardiers or their Gut. All of these 3 drops. Yeah, roll those dice and it'll be worth it. You're a deck that has played Viashido Pyromancer until very recently. And guess what? One of the worst cards you can flip off of Amped Raptor, aside from those like 3 uncastables, are shocks. And if you flip a shock off of your Amped Raptor, congratulations. You've played a Viashido or Pyromancer that can shoot anything aside from just players, and has first strike. That is wildly better. Heaven forbid you hit an actual 2-drop and then you play Amped Raptor into Karizev. Like, this card's just great. Play it in RDW. Don't play it elsewhere.
With Pyro Surfer. Oh yeah,
yeah,
riding the wave.
Hell yeah.
Dream bigger. Come on, Slick Shot.
Oh yeah. Good call. Yeah, we also get Planar Genesis for Scape Shift.
What a good card for a bad deck.
Yeah, great card for a bad deck. I think that card is fine. I'm not super excited about it.
I think it's actually pretty good.
I don't know. I've like been building Scape Shift, so maybe I should be more happy about it. But
I've considered it in like secret files, banned files.
Oh, interesting.
Lots of other decks. It just like Impulse is good. And
yeah,
being able to ramp is usually pretty strong.
Fair enough. All right, fair enough. You convinced me. Be worried. I will say, final thoughts for me on one card I just wanted to talk about is Invert Polarity?
Oh no, I forgot that card.
So I love this card. It's horrible in terms of, but it's going to be the most like rage-inducing card of all time. And deciding games on dice rolls or coin flips is hilarious to me.
Okay, for listeners at home, Invert Polarity is cancel, but the colorless symbol is a red. And if you flip a coin correctly, you get control of the spell instead of countering it.
And so, obviously, the very first spell I ever invert polarity was an Emrakul, and I won the coin flip. So I am now in love with this card, and that is my final thoughts. No, I will say, just as a final wrap, I really, really think this is. If Nadu wasn't in this set, I would be so immensely like happy with how this set was for Highlander in general. Tons of pushes to play 1 or 2 colors. Nothing that just kind of is like super soupy and like, ooh, this is just like a generic good card. Put it in here. For the most part, like I think the cards are very interesting. They have homes, and they push decks that are not potentially at the very top of the metagame to be better, which is very interesting to me. But yeah, like Nadu is going to kind of loom over that a little bit. But overall, I think, as I would expect a Horizon set to do, I think this has like a massive impact, like from common all the way up to mythic. Like there's just kind of banger Bs and B pluses like all over the map for a lot of people here.
It's the most excited I've been to brew decks in like I can't remember the last time I've been this excited. Like it's not just injecting one card, which sometimes pushes people, or a different pointing. It's like, oh, there's like 10 different decks I want to try. There's like 20 to 30 different cards I would like to put into different decks. You know, there's some archetypes that I'm like, oh, this is 6 cards to this deck that I kind of wanted to play before, but never actually like thought I would, and now I'm like, okay. And there's like decks that are like actually like tier 1, 1.5, tier 2 decks that are getting like 3, 5 plus cards. And I think that's extremely exciting. People are thinking about like changing like their 4-color pile decks completely to a different shard, different wedge. That's amazing for the format. I think it's just very exciting. I think it's just like this is like the Modern Horizon sets have always been very good for our format, because they are, an entire set that's geared towards more of the modern power level and the eternal power levels of other formats, and that really lends itself to our format where we're constantly searching for like density. And this one not only added good stuff cards, but added like excitable build arounds that is amazing. Like I think this is the most excited I've been in Magic in a long time. It's also the most excited I've been for our format in a long time. So yeah, it's been really positive, really good. And then yeah, whatever. People are just gonna get over Nato. It's fine.
I really want to echo what Spencer said. Like, I am so pumped to build or to play more with this set. I have not had a good chance to play. Let me tell you, my deck building site is filled with different lists and graveyards of lists that I have tested on my own and found to be garbage. Lists that I'm super excited to play more in person. I am so pumped for this set, and not just from a like individual decks that I'm excited to build and excited to see other pilots refine, but really how the format seems to be shifting more towards, based on these incentives, towards less colors. Like, if you had said like 2 years ago, Sasha, Modern Horizons 3 is going to make 3-color decks and 2-color decks better, I would have kind of laughed at you and said like, oh, did they print like a good piece of non-basic hate? And in a weird way, like even though there is non-basic hate in this set in the form of like Wintermoon and the Island Magus, it really is the like 2 and 3-color incentive cards where there's both a density of good cards in those shards, so you don't need to reach for that 4th color as often, and you have these very powerful modal double-faced cards that really incentivize you to be in less colors, and all on top of the Surveil lands that it was exhibited before. So I am really excited to see the format shift towards that and see more, frankly, brewing in the space. So it's no longer just the Jeskai Green pile and like, oh, if your spicy mid-range deck is check. I want to see Esper, I want to see Grixis, I want to see all these other decks actually rise to prominence.
100%. And like also like watching all the tier 1 decks kind of like reevaluate, like, if we're like currently, if you're thinking of like Time Vault, Gruul monsters, and like Jeskai, and Jeskai Green is like the top hemisphere, like watching them reevaluate their curve and card choices as like these influx of their cards impact their decks perhaps directly. Like even Time Vault like sees like this one land and maybe like that push, and like maybe some of the other flip cards or something like that. Then I'll watching them, I'll be like, okay, do I add a color now? Do I change a color? Do I drop a color? Is Grixis now viable? Is that better than Jeskai? What's like the meta dependent? Because before, if it's like Jeskai Green versus Jeskai Green or Jeskai versus Jeskai Green, now it's like, well, is Grixis, is Dark Jeskai, is Check, like which one's like the best blue mid-range soup pile now? And I don't think like there's a clear answer at this moment, and that's also exciting.
Yeah, I definitely felt like the colors that were the most ahead, and in particular, I'm thinking about red, but got not just this slew of very powerful Modern Horizons 2 cards, but also got cards like Gut, got cards like Broadside Bombardiers that have really meant that it's solidified its control in the meta, not just for the mid-range decks, but the aggro decks. To see it get so few cards in the set, and to see like Black in particular, which has struggled in our format for so long, get all of these really powerful additions, to see White get these very good additions too, like these are the colors that I want to see do better, and it's really, really nice to see that actually manifest. Same thing with blue. Blue got 3 cards in this set, and really it's only 2 in the form of Tameo and Psychic Frog.
Yeah, I think, and that was, I think, why one of the big reasons I was really excited was I think decks and colors that needed influxes got them. And and that makes me always excited to build new decks. And yeah, like I've actually been like cleaning out my Moxfield profile and like moving decks to finished, and I've got tons of decks I still want to play. And I've like recently resubscribed to Mana Traders, and I've been playing a little bit of Modern, but it's mostly so I can like build Highlander decks, rent them, and jam them for an hour or two when I've got some spare time. But yeah, so I think those are our final thoughts. Probably went a little bit long, so we appreciate you sticking with us for our comeback episode.
But also, we got Modern Horizons 3, quote unquote, set review done in one.
Maybe. Yeah, we did do it in one. But yeah, so I think, as we said, we hope this was informative, kind of informally set review, looking at it from the lens of the decks. And yeah, we'll have some other interesting content and other tournaments coming up. So stick around, and if you have any decks or thoughts or anything you in particular would like to see, feel free to ping us. I think we're all fairly active in the Discord. I am Old Dubsy on the Discord, and I think you guys are pinned on the Discord and as counselors. So Spencer is Deathrite Shaman, and Sasha is Sasha's Hideous Laughter. And yeah, I'm always happy to chat. If you have anything you would like discussed or deep dives on decks, I think the Death and Taxes with Jack even being kind of an outdated episode with a couple sets coming out still did really well metrically on Spotify. So if there's decks you want a deep dive on, or guests or anything like that, please let us know.
See y'all.
Have a good night.
Have a good one.